never done anything else. I don't know how to do anything else. I've been preaching for 17 years. My dad was an evangelist. So I grew up in that type of ministry, just souls. My dad used to go and buy bread and milk, and then he would come back with a soul, and he forgot about the bread and milk. So I grew up in that type of ministry, and then 4 years ago, the Lord called me to the prophetic. I didn't apply for it. I didn't fill in a form. The Lord called me. It found me. And I met Prophet Ed, and immediately we had a godly connection, and he became my spiritual father. So I'm part of a ministry now called Prophetic Life. And Prophet Ed I'm leaving from here in 2 weeks from now to Germany, then back and then again to America for 6 weeks, traveling with Prophet Ed. And he's such a man of God. He's really labored for the last 30 years for the prophetic all over the world, and he's bled for the prophetic. He's pioneered the prophetic. So when I met him 4 years ago, I said to him, you've really paid an expensive price for the prophetic, and you went through hell and back so that I don't have to. So I'm going to learn everything from you, and so that I don't have to go through all of those things. So he is, at this moment, if you'd call me a disciple, I'm his disciple, or he's training, equipping, traveling with him, and he's imparting into me everything, all the wisdom that he's learned. Now, we have a challenge all over the world. We have a fatherless generation. And it's one of two things. Either you didn't have a father, or you had a father who were not absent in your life. And because of that, when you meet God, or when your relationship starts with the Lord, you have this idea that God is going to be absent in your life. God doesn't really care about your life. So we are in a generation now, and we have so many men and women of God, godly men, godly women, who have really pioneered in different areas in the fivefold. And we have spiritual sons that are standing up now, and it's moving into what they have pioneered. And I really want to encourage you to find a spiritual father, to be part of a family, and so that we can take over from this generation and continue with it. Why do every generation have to start over again? There's so much wisdom that sits in this place. And this morning, I want to honor each and every one of you that's sitting here. And as I honor you, suddenly God releases the supernatural. Honor is a key to the supernatural. There's so much wisdom, so much experience in this place, and it needs to be passed on so that the next generation can walk in those things and continue to build God's kingdom. Okay, so I'm called to restore the prophetic. So I go into churches all over the world and train and equip and restore the prophetic in a sense. Let me try to explain to you in this way. Many of the churches that I go to overseas, even though they believe in the Holy Spirit or they're Spirit-filled, they don't allow me to prophesy in, because of what prophets have done over the years. And therefore, it's important to bring back biblical standards and what the prophetic is, what the purpose is of the prophetic. We have a big difference between Old Testament and New Testament prophet. There's a big difference. And today we have a lot of New Testament prophets that's functioning with Old Testament mindsets. They think they're still there to dictate to pastors and to people, tell them what they need to do. The main purpose of a New Testament prophet today is to strengthen your relationship with the Lord. It's the main purpose. That's it. And that's what I want to achieve here today. I don't want you to remember me after the meeting. I want you to leave here and have a desire to hear from God. To be inspired, say, Lord, speak to me. If you would listen, God would speak. God has a far greater desire to speak to you than you will ever have to hear from Him. He made you for communication, for communion. And He wants to speak to you. We're living in a time where God's speaking daily and constantly. It is not just once a year. God's speaking to you today. Many people, because I'm in the prophetic, they would constantly ask me, what does God say about my life? And I would tell them, what did God tell you? You know, every person that's sitting in this room today is called for full-time ministry. Every person. Our offices just looks different. My wife is a doctor, but she has the same responsibility to represent Christ than I have in the prophetic. And that's the same thing with you here today. I have a responsibility to hear God's voice, but you have the same responsibility to hear from the Lord. Concerning your business, concerning your family, concerning that. I was speaking on this one morning, and the old man got up and he said, Andre, I don't understand this. Why do I pay tithe then? Don't I pay tithe so that my pastor can go and hear from God? I'm a businessman. I need to work. And this is really Old Testament thinking. There's a lot of people that think that way. They think that they just need to come to church to get a word. You have the same responsibility to hear from the Lord. To ask God, Lord, what is happening concerning my business? What do I need to do? Where do I need to go? What is your plan with my family for this year, for this season of my life? So we train and we equip. I just recorded a series with a pastor in New York. It's one of the pastors that threw out all the prophets in his church and said he will never again allow them back because of what they've done. So the Lord sent me, and we really developed a great relationship. And we recorded a series called Pastor and Prophet Relationship. And we sit and we discuss, what is the role of a prophet within the local church. Now, I want you to understand, if you are here this morning and you believe or think that you're prophetic or that you're called to be a prophet, that it is vital for you to be part of a local church. It's very important to be part of a local family somewhere and be connected. I've been traveling and seeing so many things. The last 3 years I've been to just over 20 nations, and I sense something within the churches all over the world. For the church to continue to grow, specifically America and Europe, we need the entire fivefold ministry to come back to the local church. We need the prophets to come back to the local church. We need the evangelists to come back and work as a team, functioning under the government or the authority of the local pastor or prophet, pastor or apostle. Not prophet, sorry. Pastor or apostle. So when I came here this morning, God has called me for the prophetic, but I came into this place and I'm submitting my gifting under this church. I'm not here to, give you direction. I'm here to come and encourage what God has placed here already. When the Lord called Apostle Allen to this place, or send him here, the Lord sent him here with a vision. And surely God will guide him and show him what he needs to do. He doesn't need a prophet to come in here and direct him. I just had a pastor who flew me to his church, all the way there to come and give the church direction. And I walked into the meeting and I said, thank you for the flight and the food, but I don't do direction. So sorry, I'm going back home. Surely as a pastor, you have the responsibility to hear from God. You need to hear from the Lord and ask God, Lord, what do I need to do? You placed me here in this position. So that's what we do now. It's an exciting experience. There is never a dull moment with Prophet Ed. So he's such a blessing, and he will be back here with you in May this year. Okay. Now I want you to open your Bibles in the book of Timothy. 1 Timothy chapter 1 verse 18. Are you ready? 1 Timothy chapter 1 verse 18. We read, he says, Timothy, my son. Now, Paul is writing here to Timothy. We know that Timothy is not his physical son. So if you don't believe in spiritual fathers yet, then you need to start to believe in it now. Okay? So it says, Timothy, my son, I'm giving you this command in keeping with the prophecies once made about you, so that by recalling them, you may fight the battle well. Now, Timothy has a calling on his life, and he has all these prophetic words, and he's insecure, and he doesn't know what to do. So Paul is writing to him and says, this is how you're going to fight this battle. You're not going to fight this battle by trying to do spiritual warfare and fight demons. The way you're going to fight this battle is by bringing the prophetic word or the promise of God into remembrance. So look at it. Now, there's been a few that's sitting here this morning, and you have prophetic words that's been given over your life. God has given you promises of what He's going to do in your life. Many of you don't need another prophetic word. You just need the words or the promises that God has given you to come into fulfillment. Okay? And part of this morning or this weekend is I want to come and stir up the promises of God. We want to call those prophetic words we want to recall them and say, God, this is the things that you said you're going to do. Doesn't matter if it's been 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 5 years ago, we want to call those words into existence. I want to share a testimony with you this morning. I went to a church 14 years ago. It's a pastor, it was my pastor then, and this morning during the worship, he had a prophet there. And it was the first encounter that I had with the prophet. And during the worship, this prophet walked to me and took the mic and started to prophesy over my life. Now, I was moved by this prophecy. I've never received a prophecy before, and I wrote down the time, the date, and all the detail of this prophetic word in the front of my Bible. I was so moved by this word. God said He's going to do. Now, when I received the prophetic word, I thought it would take 3 months, maybe 6 months most, to come into fulfillment. Nothing longer than that, because He's a prophet. Anyway, so I got this prophetic word, and 12 years later, I went to the same pastor. I was in Pretoria, went to visit him, and I had coffee with him before the meeting. And while we are fellowshipping, he said to me, I have a guest speaker here this morning, and he told me the name, and it was the same prophet that prophesied to me 14 years ago. So I said to him, I know this guy. I took out my Bible. I said to the pastor, look here. Now, by that stage, the page came loose out of my Bible. I walked with that piece of paper. I said to him, yeah, look, date, time, his name, everything. This guy prophesied to me 14 years ago. Now, he is not there at the moment. We're still waiting for him to arrive. The meeting starts, and during the worship, he arrives, this prophet, comes into the meeting, walks to the front, takes the mic, walks over to me, and starts to prophesy over me again the exact same word that he prophesied to me 14 years ago. Obviously, he can't remember me. I had evidence, but he can't remember me. And he prophesied line for line exactly the same thing that he prophesied to me 14 years ago. And then he ended, and the last sentence was different. He said, but God says it's about to happen now. And within 1 week, the entire word came into fulfillment. Entire prophecy, 1 week. Okay? Now, I look back at that 12 years. For 12 years, I walked with a piece of paper that had a promise of God on. But for 12 years, literally daily, I would look out the window and my life, my circumstances would be the opposite. There would be no resemblance, the opposite of what God said He's going to do. So every day I had to get up and look out the window and say, God, what will I believe? The promise that you said you're going to do, or my circumstances, my situations? 12 years. Okay. The word literally became my lifeboat. Now, one of the mistakes that people make when they receive a prophetic word is they try to carry the word and they don't allow the word to carry them. Very important. They get a prophetic word that God says that you're going to get a new job, and then on Monday they quit their current job. It's not faith, it is ignorance. You have to learn, and you have to allow the word to carry you, to open and close doors in your life. So for 12 years I had to walk. I remember, now to be honest with you, several times I got upset, and I threw the prophecy or the promise away, and I said, God, I don't know, I'm so tired of holding on to this. But I would get up and go back to it, because it was the only thing that I had. I'd pick up the promise again. I would pick up the prophecy again and say, God, you say you're going to do these things. I'm going to hold on to this promise until it comes into fulfillment. Now, I want to explain to you that a prophetic word or a promise from God can be conditional. The two conditions is faith and obedience. You have to have faith in that. You have to hold on to that prophetic word. Now, many times today, I would prophesy to people, and at that moment they would say, it honestly doesn't mean anything to me. There's no resemblance. Now you need to understand that what you hear today might not mean anything to you, but tomorrow it will change your life. So I want to encourage you to write down the promises, the prophetic words, things that God gives you. Just write it down. Write down the date, the time, the date, and just write that prophetic or promise down and just keep it. Because you will see how God will bring it into fulfillment, how He would do something with it. Now, often on a Sunday, you would receive a prophetic word, and then on Monday, all hell would break loose. And the first thing that you would think is definitely a false prophet. Now, I want to ask you, don't you think that God knew about what is about to happen on Monday? And because of that, He spoke to you on Sunday and said to you, listen, you're going to get through this thing. To give you a word of hope, to get you out of that situation, to take you through into where He wants to take you. Now, I want you to read with me the book of Mark, chapter 4, verse 35. Mark, chapter 4, verse 35. Now, when I read this passage, to me personally, it's a prophetic word. Jesus gave a prophetic word to His disciples. And this is His prophetic word that He gives them. The book of Mark, chapter 4, verse 35. It says, that day when evening came, He said to His disciples, let us go over to the other side. That's the word. That's the prophetic word. He just prophesied to them. He just gave them a promise. He said to them, let's go over to the other side. Leaving the crowd behind, they took Him along just as He was in the boat. There were also other boats with Him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat, so it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke Him and said to Him, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, Quiet, be still. Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to His disciples, Why are you so afraid? You still have no faith. Okay? It's amazing how a storm can take your life or your relationship with the Lord from the best place to the worst. Before they got into this boat, He told them, He gave them a promise, He gave them a prophetic word, and He said to them, let us go over to the other side. Many times you sit in a storm and you think you're in that storm because of disobedience. Yet this day, they are in that storm because of obedience. Because they listened to Him, because they followed His word. He told them, get into the boat, we are going to the other side. And they responded. But immediately they allowed fear to come into their hearts, and they started to accuse Him. Remember, they are His disciples, they are His followers. They are close with Him, they walk with Him. Immediately they start to blame
to Jesus, 2, to recommit your life to Jesus, and 3, to make sure that heaven is your home. If you haven't raised your hand, but you want to still be included in this prayer, raise your hand now in the name of Jesus. Just looking across this auditorium, one last opportunity. All right, we're going to pray now. If you raised your hand at any stage, there's a leader has come across, somebody has come across their hands up in City Live. Praise Jesus, that's great decision. There's a leader who has put their hand on your shoulder. The reason being is that you should never walk alone. We're going to pray right now, and I'm going to ask you, if you raised your hand, to just picture yourself standing in front of God right now. I want you to talk to Him directly. Everybody else around you is going to say the same prayer out loud, so nobody's listening to you except God. Let's all say this together. Father, I come to you this morning because I believe that Jesus is your Son. I believe He died for me. I believe He paid my price. And this morning, I declare